You've crossed into the Veil. This is VeilwynK. Tonight's story is Deer Trail, written by Noel Haynes 2-631. The moving van groaned like a dying beast as it lurched into the graveled driveway of 14 Blackwood Lane. For 12-year-old Tabitha, the sound was the perfect anthem for her life. Behind them lay her best friends, her middle school, and the only life she had ever known. Ahead of them stood a Victorian relic wrapped in a choking shroud of ivy and gray mist. New beginnings, Tabitha. Her father, John, chirped the words, though even he looked weary from the 12-hour haul. Tabitha's mother, Susan, squeezed her shoulder. It's got character, honey. You'll see. Tabitha didn't care about character. She cared that her phone had 0 bars and that the air smelled like wet earth and ancient rot. As her parents began the grueling process of unloading boxes, Tabitha wandered toward the backyard. The grass was waist high, slowly reclaiming the earth. At the very edge of the property, where the lawn died and the deep, suffocating woods began, she saw it. A narrow, perfectly worn path. A deer path. It didn't look like a normal path. The dirt was packed hard, almost polished, winding into the shadows of trees that seemed to lean toward one another like conspirators. Curiosity, sharp and sudden, pricked at her. She took a step toward it, her sneaker hovering over the threshold of the woods. I wouldn't do that if I were you, little girl. Tabitha jumped, a small shriek escaping her throat. Standing beside the rusted wire fences of the neighboring property was a man who looked as though he had been carved from the same gray wood as the trees. He was lean and dressed in stained overalls, with eyes that seemed too large for his sunken face. I'm Bill. His voice sounded like grinding stones. Just then, John and Susan jogged over, alerted by Tabitha's grasp. Is everything okay? John slid an arm around Tabitha. Everything's fine. I'm just giving the girl a warning. This trail here, it's got history. Susan frowned. History? It's just a deer path, isn't it? Bill slowly shook his head. 20 years ago, there was a boy named Oscar. The poor kid lived a hard life. His parents were the kind of people the world's better off without. One night, Oscar finally had enough of them, and he ran. I was sitting right on my porch when I saw him bolt into those woods, right down that trail. Bill leaned over the fence, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. Oscar never came out. Not the next day. Not the next year. Not ever. No prints, no clothes, no body. It was like the woods swallowed him whole. The air suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Tabitha looked toward the dark opening of the trail. According to the old legend, once a person goes through the deer trail, they can never return to the real world. Bill's eyes locked onto hers. The woods keep what they catch. Susan's face had gone pale. That's quite a story, Bill. She turned to Tabitha, her grip firm. Tabitha, I mean it. Do not go near those woods. We don't know what kind of sinkholes or animals are back there. Stay on the lawn. Promise me. Tabitha looked at the trail. Then she looked back at her mother. She tucked her hands behind her back and crossed her fingers tight. I promise, Mom. It's 2 a.m. The house was silent, save for the settling of old floorboards. Tabitha lay awake, staring into the darkness. The silence of the countryside felt louder than the traffic of the city. The legend of Oscar throbbed inside her mind like a heartbeat. Never return to the real world. It sounded like a challenge. It sounded like an escape. All day, Tabitha had watched her old life disappear into cardboard boxes. Her friends were hours away. Her phone was useless. Even her parents seemed determined to pretend that this crumbling house was some kind of adventure. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Maybe walking the trail was reckless, but right then, reckless felt better than trapped. Tabitha slid out of bed. She didn't put on her shoes or her robe. In her white silk nightgown, her skin pale as marble in the moonlight, she crept down the stairs and slipped through the back door. The grass was cold and damp beneath her bare feet. The woods loomed like a wall of obsidian, but the trail seemed to glow with a faint, sickly bioluminescence. Tabitha stared toward the dark opening. I won't go too far. Just far enough to prove Bill's story is nothing more than a story. She reached the mouth of the path and paused. The owl's call cut through the silence. Tabitha bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she didn't turn back. She felt a strange pull, a weight in the air that seemed to drag her forward. Tabitha stepped onto the hard-packed dirt. The trail was a tunnel of thorns and ancient bark. The farther she walked, the more the sound of the night began to change. The crickets fell silent. The wind died. All Tabitha could hear was the rhythmic of her own heart and the soft rustle of silk against her legs. Tabitha walked for what felt like miles, though the house should have only been a few minutes behind her. The trees began to change. They grew taller, their branches twisted into shapes that looked uncomfortably like reaching fingers. Then, she smelled it. Copper. Raw meat. The scent was so thick that she could taste it on her tongue. Tabitha rounded a sharp bend and froze. The trail opened into a small, moonlit clearing. 10 feet away, a nightmare stood. It was nearly 8 feet tall, hunched over a bloody mass on the ground. It had the body of a man, but its skin was stretched tight like gray parchment over bulging, misplaced muscles. Its legs were double jointed, ending in cloven hooves that clicked against the stones. From its head sprouted a massive, jagged racks of antlers, dripping with moss and dried gore. It was hunched over the carcass of a golden retriever, their neighbor's missing dog, tearing into its flesh with elongated human-like fingers, tipped with black claws. Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. She took one step backward. Her heel came down on a fallen twig. The creature froze. Slowly, with the sickening sound of vertebrae snapping. Its head rotated 180 degrees. It didn't have a deer's face, not entirely. behind the elongated snout and the black, lidless eyes, Tabitha saw the undeniable remnants of a human boy. Around its neck, tangled in fur and filth, hung a rotted, mud-stained cord. Attached to it was a small, silver locket, the kind a child might keep to remember a mother who never loved him. Oscar? The realization struck her with the force of a freight truck. The creature didn't speak. Instead, it released a sound that was half whistle, half scream. It dropped the dog and rose onto its hind legs. Its antlers scraped against the low-hanging branches. Tabitha turned and ran. She ran until her lungs burned like coils. She ran until her bare feet were shredded and bleeding. But the trail was different now. The bends were longer, the trees were thicker. Every time Tabitha thought she saw the light of her back porch, the trail curved, plunging her back into the deep green dark. Behind her came the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of hooves. But the deer monster wasn't sprinting. It was looping around her, blocking paths, driving her deeper. It wasn't chasing her. It was hurting her. The next morning, John and Susan stood in the backyard, screaming Tabitha's name until their voices broke. They called the police. They called volunteers. They searched the woods for weeks. They found a trail, but it led nowhere. Just a dead end of thick, impenetrable briars, only 50 yards in. There were no footprints, no pieces of white silk, no signs that Tabitha had ever entered the woods at all. She was gone. 20 years later, a young couple stood in the overgrown backyard of 14 Blackwood Lane. The house had been empty for a long time. The man looked toward the gray woods. It's got character. Suddenly, a blur of white moved deep within the trees. On a trail that existed within a fold of time, a woman sprinted through the shadows. There was no mistaking it. It was Tabitha. Her white silk nightgown was now a gray, tattered rag, fused to her skin by years of grime and magic. Her feet were no longer human. Her toes had fused together, and the skin beneath them had hardened into something dark and keratinous. Tabitha stopped to breathe, leaning against a tree. She reached up to brush a strand of matted hair from her face. Her hand touched something hard, something sharp, something protruding from her temple. A small, velvet-covered antler. In the distance, she heard the whistle scream, the call of the creature that had chased her for 2 decades. But the deer monster wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the pack leader. Tabitha looked back toward the edge of the woods. The real world appeared bright and flat. Like a movie playing across a screen she could no longer touch. She saw the new couple. She opened her mouth and tried to scream for help. But the only sound that emerged from her throat was a low, guttural bleat. Tabitha turned and disappeared back into the dark, because the legend had never been a warning. It was a rule of nature. Once a person goes through the deep trail, they can never return to the real world. And that was Deer Trail. Some places don't kill the people they take. They reshape them. They strip away their names, their memories, and everything that once made them human. Until eventually, the forest no longer sees them as an intruder. Only family. If this story pulled you deep into the Veil, leave a like and subscribe for more stories waiting in the dark.